Let's talk about GDP, or gross domestic product. It's like the economy's report card, telling us how much a country produces in a year. Think of it as the total value of all the pizzas, haircuts, and fidget spinners sold. A high GDP usually means a country is doing well, right? Well, not so fast. It's like judging a restaurant solely on its revenue. Sure, it might be raking it in, but what if the food is terrible and the service is worse? GDP is a bit like that. It tells us the what but not the how. It doesn't reveal the whole story about a country's well-being. Think of it like this. If a country is making a ton of money but its citizens are miserable, is it really successful? That's where GDP's limitations come in. One major problem with GDP is that it ignores inequality. Let's say a country's GDP is skyrocketing. Sounds great, right? But what if all that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite, while everyone else is struggling to make ends meet? That's where the Gini index comes in. It measures income inequality on a scale of 0 to 1. A score of 0 means everyone has an equal slice of the pie, while 1 means one person is hoarding the whole thing. For example, South Africa has a very high Gini index, meaning there's a massive gap between the rich and the poor. Meanwhile, Scandinavian countries tend to have much lower scores, indicating a more equitable distribution of wealth. So, a country with a high GDP might look great on paper, but if its Gini index is through the roof, it means something is seriously wrong. GDP doesn't tell us who's benefiting from the economic growth, and that's a big problem. Another issue with GDP is that it doesn't measure well-being. Sure, money is important, but it's not the only thing that matters in life. What about things like health, education, and a clean environment? That's where the Human Development Index, HDI, comes in. It takes into account factors like life expectancy, education levels, and income per capita to give us a broader picture of a country's development. For example, Costa Rica often ranks highly on the HDI despite having a lower GDP than some other countries. Why? Because they prioritize things like healthcare and education, leading to a higher overall quality of life. So, while GDP focuses on the stuff a country produces, the HDI reminds us that true progress is about more than just material wealth. It's about creating a society where people can thrive and live fulfilling lives. Let's face it, the environment often gets a raw deal when we talk about economics. It's like that friend we always forget to invite to the party, even though they bring the best snacks. GDP is particularly bad at factoring in environmental costs. In fact, it often treats environmental damage as a positive thing. How messed up is that? For example, if a company chops down a forest to build a factory, GDP goes up. But what about the loss of biodiversity, the impact on climate change, and the harm to local communities? GDP doesn't see it, so it doesn't care. This is a major flaw, as we can't ignore the environmental consequences of economic activity. We need to find a way to measure progress that takes into account the health of our planet, not just the size of our wallets. Section 5, Trickle-down economics. More like trickle-down metrics. Now, some folks might argue that a rising tide lifts all boats. They say that even if GDP isn't perfect, economic growth will eventually benefit everyone. It's the whole trickle-down theory, but here's the thing. Trickle-down economics has a pretty lousy track record. It's like waiting for a leaky faucet to fill your bathtub. You might get a few drips, but you're mostly just left with a big mess. The reality is that the benefits of economic growth often don't reach everyone equally. In fact, they often end up concentrated at the top, further exacerbating inequality. So simply relying on GDP as a measure of progress can actually mask deep-seated problems within a society. Section 6, Beyond GDP, introducing GPI, your new favorite acronym. So if GDP is so flawed, what are the alternatives? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the world of alternative economic indicators. First up, the Genuine Progress Indicator, or GPI for short. The GPI is like GDP's cooler, more environmentally conscious cousin. It takes into account things like income inequality, environmental damage, and the value of unpaid work, such as childcare and volunteering. Essentially, it tries to measure the actual well-being of a society, not just its economic output. Think of it as a more holistic approach to measuring progress, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of social, economic, and environmental factors. Section 7, Measuring What Matters. the MPI, and a world without poverty. Next up, we have the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI. This one's all about understanding poverty in all its forms, not just income deprivation. The MPI looks at factors like access to education, healthcare, clean water, and sanitation to paint a more complete picture of poverty. It recognizes that poverty is about more than just lacking money. It's about being deprived of basic human needs and opportunities. By measuring poverty in this multidimensional way, the MPI helps us identify the most vulnerable populations and design more effective policies to lift them out of poverty. It's a powerful tool for creating a more just and equitable world. Section 8, Fairness Matters, the Atkinson Index and the Quest for Economic Justice. Now, let's talk about the Atkinson Index. This one's a bit more technical, but stick with me. It's all about measuring income inequality and how much it actually costs society. The Atkinson Index is different from the Gini Index because it considers how much potential well-being is lost due to inequality. It's like saying, hey, not only is the wealth gap a problem, but it's actually dragging down the whole economy. By quantifying the cost of inequality, the Atkinson Index makes a strong case for policies that promote a fairer distribution of income, such as progressive taxation and social safety nets. It's about creating a system where everyone has a chance to succeed, not just those at the top. Section 9. Rethinking Progress. Why your wallet shouldn't speak louder than your well-being. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, it's time to rethink how we measure progress. GDP has its uses, but it's not the be-all and end-all of economic indicators. We need to look beyond the numbers on a spreadsheet and consider the well-being of people and the planet. The good news is that we have the tools to do this. The GPI, MPI, Atkinson Index, these are just a few examples of alternative measures that can help us create a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. It's time to demand better from our leaders and hold them accountable for creating societies that prioritize human well-being and environmental sustainability over short-term economic gain. After all, what good is a booming economy if we're all too miserable or sick to enjoy it?